Yesterday we began looking at the ancient civilization of Assyria, and I've checked your notes to see that you got something from the short part of the chapter that dealt with Assyria. And yesterday we filled in some of the notes ourselves, looked at the different characteristics of Assyria, that they had a highly centralized bureaucracy, they employed mass execution. I read you quite a little bit about that. One thing I neglected to get back to, and that was the mass deportation. One thing the Assyrians did when they came into an area and conquered it is that they moved people around. So they would move people from one area they conquered to another area, and people from that area to another area. And so they would kind of mix people up from the area in which they originally lived. Now, why would they do that? What would you think the reasoning was in doing that? Moving people around. Groups of people, not the whole nation, but just parts of the people in that area. They moved someplace else and moved somebody else into their spot. What would be their advantage in doing that?
They couldn't revolt as like multiple groups of people.
Right, exactly. Very good. Since no one else can know that answer, I'll give you a ring of the bell. If you have different people living in an area that's speaking different languages, different cultures, maybe they were enemies at one time even, they're less likely to get together and revolt. So that was their solution to that. And we're going to see how that plays itself out with Israel. All right, so then we also looked at some of these pictures that detail their just debauchery and the way that they treated people. Okay, now let's go further and look at the section called God's instrument. So these people, they were terrible people, the way that they, what they did to others, yet they become God's instrument. And we're going to begin that with looking at Shalmaneser III. He is the ruler of Assyria, as you see the dates there, 859 to 825. Now, in his annual campaigns to the west against Egypt, because they would every spring it seemed like kings would go out and campaign against somebody. They would try to conquer some territory. And I don't have a map that shows all the area, but if you can visualize Mesopotamia over here, and Israel over here, and Egypt down here, and up here is Assyria. Assyria then would head west, southwest, and the next civilization that they could fight against would be Egypt. So, Shalmaneser III would go down to Egypt and make war against them. Well, whenever they're coming down, and sometimes Egypt would come up, that means that the area of Israel was kind of in the middle. So battles took place there, or troops were going through there, and there was a constant threat of invasion. At that time, Jehu is the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. There's a battle then that takes place in, here's the map I should have shown you right here. Okay, so Assyria is up here, here's Nineveh, the capital, and down here, of course, is Egypt. And so going back and forth, this is the area that becomes one in which there's always activity. There's a battle that takes place at Karkar, spelled two different ways. You can see down here is Jerusalem, and there's Damascus, and up here is where the battle takes place. So it's north of Israel, close to the area of the Phoenicians. That brought these two sides together. You can see the Egyptians are coming up this way, and the Assyrians are coming down this way. Ahab's army was a part of this battle. There was a coalition of different countries led by Ben-HadadII of Syria. So that's just a famous battle that takes place there part of a coalition against Assyria. So all these nations are coming together against Assyria because they're the top dog. They're the strong ones. They're the ones that are conquering everybody around. Now, once in a while, I like to tell you what's going on in another part of the world just to give us kind of our historical bearings. At the time that this is happening, in Greece, they started using iron money. They had public tables, which must have been tables outside to do banking, things like that. There are no theaters yet, no luxuries, and severe discipline. So Greece at this point was not very well developed. The government was a mixed monarchy with 2 kings and a senate composed of 60 aged men. Land was divided between 39,000 families, and it could not be sold. So the economy is kind of stagnant. You can't sell land. Everything has to remain the same. At the same time in Rome is when the Etruscans invaded Italy, which we'll talk about when we get to Rome. We'll back up to this point. Let's talk a little bit about Jehu. Jehu ruled from 841 to 814 BC, and the prophet that was around then was the successor to Elijah. Who was that? Who followed Elijah? So we're right here with Jehu. Couple after Ahab. Who was the prophet with Ahab? Who was the prophet to Israel when Ahab was king? Had the contest on Mount Carmel? Or is this the same group that was with me this past week? Did somebody trade places with you all? Who was the prophet who had the contest on Mount Carmel against the prophets of Baal? Elijah. I just said his name a minute ago. Just went right by him. Who was the successor? Who followed Elijah? Who was his mentee that took up the cloak and the staff after Elijah? Followed in his footsteps. Was a prophet to Israel. Did many of the same miracles. Elisha. You ever heard of him? Yeah? Okay, Elijah and Elisha. Elisha was the prophet and at this time, and he directed one of the other prophets to anoint Jehu as king over Israel, while Ahaziah up here was still alive. The army acknowledged Jehu as king, and so Jehu set out for the town of Jezreel in north central Palestine, where Jehoram had returned, or Joram, either way, after being wounded in battle with the Syrians. So this battle back at Karkar. Well, when Joram heard that Jehu was coming with an army, Jehoram of Israel and Ahaziah of Judah went out to meet Jehu, and they both were killed. That's why he's not there very long. This is when Jehu then approaches the palace where Jezebel is still living. Whose husband was Jezebel? I mean, who was the husband of Jezebel? We were just talking about him. Ahab. Ahab had already died by this time. He was killed according to the prophecy of Elijah. He was killed in his chariot. Interesting reading. If you read in what these First Samuel, First Kings, I believe it is. First Kings, yeah, or it might be Second Kings. So Jezebel's still alive, and she is up on upper floor as Jehu approaches the city, and there are some people up there with her, and Jehu gives the order to throw her out the window, and so they do. That fulfilled a prophecy that the dogs would lick her bones, and that's exactly what happened. As she laid there below, dying in the fall, dogs came up and were licking. Jehu also had the sons of Ahab put to death, and the prophets of Baal slain. So Jehu's starting out pretty good here. He's doing what he should be doing. He concluded his purge of Baalism by burning the images and breaking down the temple of Baal. This is in 2 Kings 9 and 10. So this reform brought a brief period during which idolatry in Israel was somewhat checked. But Jehu stopped short of a complete spiritual house cleaning because he allowed the worship of those golden calves, those golden bulls. Remember? That were set up in Bethel and Dan. Who set those up? The first king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Remember who that was? Or can you read? Jeroboam. And all the way back here, Jehu decides not to mess with that. He's leaving that where it is. And of course, by doing so, he allowed idolatry to continue in Israel. So he went far enough to get himself seated on the throne. He obeyed Elisha that far, but he didn't totally get rid of idolatry. During the latter part of his reign, Hazael of Damascus, or Syria, attacked the borders of Israel on the north and east. Jehu reigned 28 years until his death. As you see here. He alienated the nations around him, however, especially Phoenicia and Judah. Assyria was unable to take Damascus from Hazael, so that would be up in here, Syria, Damascus. So Shalmaneser uses that as an opportunity to come down. And he recounts what he did in moving south and forcing Phoenicia and Israel to pay tribute on something called the Black Obelisk, or Obelisk. This was erected as a public monument in 825 BC during civil unrest in the final days of Shalmaneser. So he erects this to show what great things he had done in forcing Phoenicia and Israel to pay tribute to him. On this obelisk, it shows Jehu and 13 servants bringing precious gifts to Shalmaneser. Well, Assyria, through civil war, was weakening. Well, here's a close-up of Jehu and 13 servants bringing gifts to Shalmaneser. See, this must be Jehu here bowing to Shalmaneser. Assyria began to weaken then due to civil war, and that enabled Syria's Hazael, the leader of Syria, to begin to get tribute from Jehoash of Judah and to destroy the army of Israel. Hazael even plundered Jerusalem and the temple. And all this is during the time of the prophet Elisha. Next we come to Jeroboam II, who becomes the king of Israel after Jehu. He brought about a time of prosperity. It's called the Indian Summer of Israel's history. Although he was an evil king, he did reconquer Damascus and the territory from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. So all the way from here down to here. He conquered. This luxuriant age is referenced in the minor prophets of Amos and Hosea because they are writing against the trusting in material things and how they're more interested in luxury than in doing what God wants and showing mercy to people and so on. So at this time, as Jeroboam II is increasing Israel, Syria and Assyria have become weak. It's during this weak period that God sends a prophet to Assyria, specifically to the capital city of Nineveh, which must be off the map, to point out to them how evil they are and that God's going to bring judgment. Who was that prophet? Jonah. Good. But Jonah didn't want to go there. How many of you read the book of Jonah? Are you sure you read the whole thing? Because you know what happens? A lot of people stop at the end of chapter 2. You know why? What happens in chapter 2? Well, what happened to Jonah? Go to the beginning. What did Jonah do? God said, I want you to go to Nineveh and preach against that city. Their wickedness is basically giving me a stench in my nostrils. I want you to go preach. And what does Jonah do? He runs away. Instead of going toward Nineveh, this direction, he goes down to the seashore, down to Joppa, finds a ship headed to where? Did anybody know? He finds a ship headed to Tarshish. You ever heard of Tarshish? Really? Where is it? Well, you keep going this way until you get all the way to the other end of the Mediterranean Sea to Spain. That's a bit of an overkill, isn't it? Go here. Jonah says, nope, I'm going to go the opposite direction as far as I can go. And of course, you know what happens on the ship. God, it literally says, throws a storm at the ship. And they eventually go through the whole process of finding out that Jonah's the cause, and they throw him overboard. And what happens to him after he's down in the sea? He gets not eaten. You've got to be careful here. Swallowed by a great fish. My wife likes to say great fish because it doesn't use the word whale. But that's what we always think. Jonah and the whale, right? I mean, it rolls off the tongue easier than Jonah and the great fish. But anyway, he got swallowed, which was his rescue, if you read that carefully in chapter 2. And that's usually where people stop. But what happens after that? What happens after the whale or great fish swallows Jonah? See, you don't know, do you? You know what happens next? Well, what happens before that? How does he get out of the fish?
He spit out.
Yeah, the fish vomits him up. Let's make sure we understand here. It wasn't just spit. It was vomiting up onto the dry land, back along the shore again, maybe where he started. So now he's got to walk all the way over to Nineveh, and he gets there and he preaches. And you know what was his message? Do you know? In Hebrew, it's only 5 words.
Well, how long was he in the for?
3 days. Because Jesus used that later on as an illustration of him being in the ground for 3 days. Jonah's message.
Wasn't it believe or judgment?
Not even that good. His message was 40 days, Nineveh, no more. That's it. Now, whether he expanded on that, we don't know, but that's what we're told was his message. 40 days, Nineveh, no more. And he just walked through town saying that. Now, what might have gotten the people's attention to make them listen? Was there anything about Jonah that might have got their attention? And they would say, wow, we better listen to this guy.
The fact that he disobeyed God and swallowed by a whale.
How would they know that?
He told them.
He just said 40 days, Nineveh, no more. What might you look like if you've been in the stomach of a big fish for 3 days?
A hobo.
A hobo?
Yeah, like drenched in like.
What do you mean? Drenched in what?
Like vomit from.
Well, I imagine when he got vomited out, he probably cleaned himself up a bit, don't you think? I mean, did he walk all the way to Nineveh with little pieces of fish hanging on him? Do you think so? What's in a stomach besides food? What's in the stomach to digest the food? Acid. What do you think acid would do to you if you're laying in it for 3 days? Huh? Yeah, it'll burn your skin, and at least bleach him, right? So at least I imagine that's probably what he probably looked like, totally white. His hair, everything would be totally bleached out. His clothing, everything. So that might get their attention. Plus, they might have even heard about it, because when the sailors threw Jonah overboard, it says they went back, and they had already offered sacrifices to God and were believers in Yahweh. All right. So Jonah goes to Nineveh, and he preaches. And how do the Ninevites respond? They repented. From the king on down to the animals, they wore sackcloth and put ashes on to indicate that they were repenting. And so did God destroy them? No. And that must have made Jonah happy, right? See, you didn't read the rest of the book, did you? Jonah was mad. Why would he be mad? I mean, if you were preaching somewhere and people repented and came to the Lord, wouldn't you be happy? But Jonah was angry. He didn't want the Assyrians to receive God's mercy. He wanted God to destroy them. Why? For what we just said before, Assyria was always coming down and attacking Israel. There was always a problem, and he was afraid that someday Assyria would get strong enough again to come and finish Israel. And at the same time, he wanted Israel to repent, and thought that would be a good example. He could go back to Israel and say, see what happened to Assyria because they didn't repent? You better repent or God's going to do that to you. But instead, God didn't destroy them, so he was angry. And God points out to Jonah that he has no reason to be angry because God showed mercy to the Ninevites. Well, we've spent a lot of time on Jonah there. I suggest you read the entire book sometime. Get past the Jonah and the whale to the rest of it, all right? So Assyria is weak at this time, and that's when Jonah comes. By the way, history tells us that in this time period, that the Ninevites did start worshiping one God. They had called him a different name than Yahweh, but they worshiped one God. And that it was the next generation, or maybe 2 generations from then, that they started acting wickedly again. And we'll see what they do. All right, next we come to Uzziah. Uzziah, sometimes called Azariah in the Old Testament, and he is in Judah. Now, Uzziah was a good king who reigned for 52 years. Under his reign, Israel was very prosperous. Uzziah used things like siege engines in battle. He set out on a sweeping campaign against Philistia, reaching Ashdod and gaining access to the sea from Jabneh to the mouth of the Jarkon River. So he went over this way to Philistia. He renewed the borders of the kingdom of David. So he expanded the borders to what David had. He completed the conquest of Edom, down here, and conquered the southern desert regions against various Arabian tribes. He developed the economy of Judah and the outlying regions. He received simple yet exalted praise in the Bible. One reason for his success and the renewal of profitable trade was Uzziah's reconstruction of Israelite fortresses along the roads of the Negev desert. The Negev is down here. And so he built, in this area. He built fortresses down here as protection. In his later years, he made a big mistake. He intruded into the priest's office, and God struck him with leprosy. So that was the one bad thing that he did. Now, at the same time, Rome was just being founded. Next we come to Tiglath-Pileser. We're back in Assyria again. This is a period of decline until here. So this is when Assyria starts getting strong again. He's considered the founder of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. By the way, Tiglath-Pileser, excellent name to put on your list for your children. It would be unusual. You would have the humor of seeing your child having to learn how to spell his name. Tiglath-Pileser. Everybody would be the envy. He would be the envy of everyone with such a name. He was a good administrator and a military leader who seized the throne. In 743, he fought against another coalition in Syria, possibly led by Uzziah. And some Israelites were carried into captivity as a result of this battle. In 732, he was summoned by King Ahaz of Judah to drive away King Pekah of Israel and Aram, or Syria. So in other words, the king of Judah, instead of relying upon the Lord, was calling upon this heathen nation, these people that are so awful to everyone, to come and save him from the king of Israel. Two nations that should have gotten along. Isaiah warned against this alliance in chapter 7 of Isaiah. Ahaz of Judah was very wicked. He worshipped idols and actually burned children in sacrifice. Tiglath-Pileser took Damascus and Iran, annexing half of Israel under Pekah's leadership. Took over half of Israel. Then Hoshea of Israel assassinated Pekah. Going back to our list of kings, I think you have a list there in your notes. Look, and you'll see that Hoshea comes after Pekah. Reigned 9 years, and during that time he was in subjection to Assyria, paid tribute to Assyria. Then he allied himself with Egypt. He saw a chance to get away from Assyria, and so he joined up with Egypt and attempted independence by withholding the tribute. That gets the attention of whoever you're supposed to be paying it. And he did this following the death of Tiglath-Pileser, because he thought this is a good time. You know, old Tig is dead, and things are kind of in disarray. This would be a good time for me not to pay them what I'm supposed to, and align myself with Egypt to fight against them, and then we will be able to have independence. Here is a drawing of an Assyrian chariot. Here's the horse, the chariot back here, and they're hunting a lion, which you can see, here's the lion's head there. At the same time that this is going on in Greece, you may have heard about a battle that took place. Oh no, you wouldn't have known about this battle, never mind. There was a battle between 300 Argives and 300 Spartans. They fought until there were only 2 Argives left and only 1 Spartan left. Talk about fighting to the bitter end, huh? All right, so this is the Assyrian campaigns against Israel and Judah. It's kind of hard to see on this map, but you know, here's Syria up here, and they're coming down into Israel and Judah down here. Next we come to Shalmaneser V, the next Assyrian leader. Another good name, if Tiglath-Pileser is too long, Shalmaneser might work for you. He came down and besieged Samaria, the capital of Israel, for 3 years. Now, what would it be like inside of a city if nobody could get in or out for 3 years? That would be pretty dire conditions, right? And it was. Eventually, Shalmaneser captured over 20,000 of the Israelites, and in 724 BC imprisoned Hoshea when he came out and tried to bargain with Shalmaneser. Shalmaneser V begins the destruction or the defeat of the northern kingdom of Israel, but it's the next guy Sargon III who actually completes it. Sargon III in 722 brings about the capture of Israel. He claimed credit for the fall of Israel. He actually just was kind of coming in at the tail end of it. And as a result of this, Israel was deported en masse. That means that he gathered up, not all, but most of the Israelites and just sent them to other places. And then brought other people in, like we talked about before. This is the beginning of the Samaritans. The Samaritans were the result of Israelites who were living there in Israel intermarrying with people that were imported from other places. Now, what was wrong with that? Well, as Israelites, they were only supposed to marry other Israelites. Because when you married other nations, that also brought in their idolatry, and God wanted to keep them pure. All right, so anything you read about the Samaritans in the New Testament, this is where it begins. In 721, Sargon was defeated in Babylon, but he also put down revolts in a couple other places, including Egypt. In 717, he leveled the city of Carchemish, which is where King Midas lived. You ever heard of King Midas? What have you heard about King Midas? Whatever King Midas touched turned to gold. Now that's the myth, but there really was a King Midas, and evidently he was very wealthy. I don't think it was to that extent, but very wealthy. And he was defeated by Sargon. Then in 709, he was able to recapture Babylon, and in 705, he was killed in battle. That's Sargon III. This again shows a map of Assyria here, Babylon down here, and Israel, well, there's Samaria, Israel there, and Judah down further. The Israelites that were taken from Israel were largely settled up in this area and this area over here. Okay, let's review a little bit of the timeline here as we consider what has taken place. Let's see, we've got Sennacherib yet to go. And I think we'll get to him tomorrow. So let's review a little bit. We have Abraham enters Canaan in 2091 BC. Jacob moves his family to Egypt, following who? Joseph in 1876 BC. Moses leads the Exodus from Egypt, 1446. Joshua enters the land of Canaan, brings about the fall of Jericho in 1406. Then we had the period of the Judges, when everyone did what? Everyone acted according to, no, they didn't, according to what they wanted to do. Each one did what they wanted. Each one acted, did what was right in his own eyes. And then we have Saul becoming king, David becoming king, Solomon becoming king. When Solomon dies, the kingdom is divided. The northern nation is called Israel. The southern nation is called the northern nation's first king was the southern nation of Judah's first king. The capital of Israel was, the capital of Judah was, good. And then 722 we come to the fall of Israel by the Assyrians. And the northern kingdom of Israel ceases to exist. And they're gone. They're scattered, except for some that are left there. All right, tomorrow we'll go to the next Assyrian leader. So we'll finish that up. We will review what we've learned about Assyria. And see, tomorrow's the last day we have class this week. So that means on Monday we'll have a quiz over Assyria. Also, your interim read reports are due on Monday. So make sure that you have those caught up and ready to turn in. All right, any questions? Okay, I hope all of you go to the soccer game tonight and support our team as they have their last home game, I think, right?
We have like
like a makeup game
a makeup game.
after this.
It's the last scheduled home game anyway, and it's senior night, so hopefully we'll see you there.